Thank you for joining us. This recording was captured live at the 2026 NRB conference. While there may be a few moments where the audio isn't perfect, we're excited to share these great insights and discussions with you.
Well, hey everybody, here we are again at NRB 26 here in Nashville, and really met an amazing guy that I want to introduce to you. It's Joshua Enck. He's the president of Sight and Sound and the director of a new film that's coming out for America's 250th anniversary, and the film is called The Great Awakening.
A Great Awakening.
A Great Awakening.
Yep.
Okay, great. So it's because there's been more than one.
Exactly.
A Great Awakening.
Yeah.
Well, Joshua, tell us a little bit about Sight and Sound first.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, Rich, thanks for having me on your show. It's an honor to be here. And Sight and Sound Ministries has been around for 50 years. We're actually celebrating our 50th year anniversary this year, same year that our country is celebrating 250th.
So if people who know the Bible, this is your first Jubilee. It's America's 5th Jubilee.
That's right. Yeah, it's a Jubilee season for Sight and Sound. It was founded by a farmer and his wife who left the dairy farm, and they were producing, milk at dairy farms, and he was a photographer and an artist, and he was called to put his art and pictures to slideshows with music, and he would travel the nation with inspirational slideshows, and the Lord called him to start producing stage productions then as well. So he went from producing milk to producing stage productions, and now Sight and Sound is arguably the world's largest faith-based theatrical experience. We have 2 theaters, one in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, 2,070-seat theater, and then a matching theater in Branson, Missouri, where we bring the Bible to life on stage. And it was around 2020 that we felt called to also bring the Bible to life on screen with true stories of figures from history that changed the world because Christ first changed them.
Yeah, wow, well said. And that's exciting. At our ministry, as I was telling you before we came on the camera, we do a lot of dramatic productions, and they really have the power to move people, don't they? To touch their hearts and their imagination and their emotions in a way that just maybe reading something doesn't quite do.
Exactly. And my personal calling in my life is to move people's hearts towards truth through the power of story. If storytelling was a method that the Son of God, Jesus, chose during his 3.5-year ministry with parables, I think it works. And so the power of story, it takes people from the head to the heart. And that's why with this film, A Great Awakening, there's a lot of historical data and books written about the events that took place. But there was an event that took place called The Great Awakening, that I don't want it to be just head knowledge for Americans today. I want it to come into their heart so they understand the spiritual awakening that took place during that time.
Okay, so you're referring to what's called the First Great Awakening.
That's right.
Happened in the latter half, or really in the middle of the 18th century, or the 1700s. Led up to the American War of Independence. Tell us more about that, and what are you doing in this movie, A Great Awakening?
So I wanted to do a film on liberty for our 250th anniversary, and I started down a path of thinking it was going to be a film about George Washington, the Revolution. I was really getting excited about it, but I kept hitting some creative roadblocks, and my wife sent me away for a couple of days to, because she knew I was having, some writer's block. And the Lord spoke to my heart and said, you have liberty right, you have your Georges wrong. And my co-writer, Jeff Bender, his favorite person in history is George Whitefield. And so I started to explore George Whitefield, and I found his incredible and unlikely friendship with Benjamin Franklin. And it was them two together that sparked the Great Awakening. So George Whitefield was arguably the most powerful evangelist of all time, arguably. He had this powerful supernatural speaking voice. He wanted to be an actor. He went to Oxford to be trained, where he met the Holy Club, and he got born again, and he became a preacher and then a traveling itinerant minister. And the Lord sent him to the colonies, the United States. And when Ben Franklin heard him speak on Market Street, 1739, from the balcony of the courthouse, Ben Franklin did a scientific experiment right then and there on the spot to measure how many people could actually hear this guy's voice because it was so big. And he calculated that 30,000 people could hear George Whitfield's voice without any amplification. And Ben Franklin said, I have to get to know this guy.
That's
and so
amazing.
this film is about how the Lord providentially brought them together during the 30 years that led up to the Revolution to help create a self-governing people that really fueled the Revolution.
Well, that's
incredible.
Amazing. So there's so many directions I could go with this. I just tell a quick story. So at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., they have this exhibit. Sometimes it's open, sometimes it's not, in the Museum of American History. And they had it open this one time when I was there, and they actually have one of Whitfield's pulpits.
Oh, my word.
There, and it's a collapsible fold-up thing, like a folding chair almost.
Like an accordion almost.
Yeah, that he would strap to his horse.
Yes.
And he literally would ride from town to town and hold these meetings. You correct me, because I'm sure you've become quite an expert. But my understanding is he preached over 1,800 times up and down the 13 colonies over a period of several years. And it's estimated that 70 or 80%? 80% of Americans...
You know your history, that's right.
Okay, 80% of Americans heard his voice in person.
80% of colonists not only heard of George Whitfield, but actually heard his voice. He preached 3 times a day, woke up at 4 a.m. every morning. And he built his own traveling pulpit that he strapped onto a horse. And he came over to the United States that many times, or the colonies that many times, that he spent 2.5 years on a ship, just going back and forth to the colonies. He was a phenomenon. In fact, one of my favorite stories, and it's depicted in our film, is in Bristol, England. He set up his traveling pulpit because he got kicked out of the Anglican Church for being too theatrical. And he set up his pulpit in the middle of a coal mine in Bristol, England. And he started to preach without anybody around. And like black ants, these coal miners came out of the earth and descended on his pulpit. And he said, I could tell the Holy Spirit had an effect on them when I saw white streaks going down their blackened cheeks. And we depict that scene in this film.
Dude, wow,
it's
amazing.
pretty powerful.
Amazing. So talk about, now Franklin, modern historians will say that he was a deist or even an atheist and was not a Christian. But he developed this close friendship with George Whitfield. How did that impact Franklin?
Oh my goodness. Well, first of all, we don't have an agenda with this movie, or at Sight and Sound in general. Like, we're not out to try to prove or disprove the faith of our founding fathers. That's not what this movie's about. We simply tell a true story of this unlikely friendship that sparked the Great Awakening. So, interestingly, with Ben Franklin, he had a Puritan father, a very religious father, who owned a candle shop. And Ben Franklin was the 10th born son of Josiah, his father. And his father set him aside as a holy tithe at a young age. And he wanted Ben Franklin to be a preacher. And actually sent him to school for a little bit to be a preacher in the seminary. Ben Franklin rejected it, and he ran away from this faith, only to find out years later that he became the greatest promoter of the greatest awakening the colonies have ever seen.
Oh my God.
And so the Lord redeemed the calling that was on his life. And so, although one of my favorite quotes of Ben Franklin when he was confronted with the being born again and the Jesus component to all of it, he said something, and this is in the movie, he says, if I were ever to have this born again experience, I would never give you or anyone else the pleasure of knowing it. He was a very prideful man. But that's what makes this film so rich, is, we don't sugarcoat or Christianize the whole thing. It was a real friendship. And there are letters that exist between Whitfield and Franklin. They wrote each other because they were such close friends, where George would beg for Ben to consider the truths of the gospel. And we explore that in this film. We explore the flaws of George Whitfield, the flaws of Ben Franklin, but what's undeniable is the speech that Ben Franklin gave in June of 1787 at the Constitutional Convention, when he called, well, I'm not going to give it away, but he called the delegates to something extremely powerful that came from an unlikely source.
Well, and I think, just objectively speaking, that what he did, he was the turning point in the Constitutional Convention that opened the door. And I would say this, for the Lord to bring forth the concepts that are now in the U.S. Constitution,
Right.
the longest-lasting Constitution
Yeah.
in the history of the world,
Yeah.
the model for free Republican government, the genius of checks and balances,
Oh,
and
I know.
everything that's in it.
It's incredible.
It is incredible.
Yeah.
Well,
And if I may, can I just jump in
Sure,
and just
sure,
say,
go ahead.
like if Edmund Randolph, one of the delegates, would have stood up and gave that speech, it wouldn't have had the impact because he was a believer and his father was a believer, and in the First Continental Congress. But for Ben Franklin to stand up at that quagmire, at that crossroads of the wheels were coming off at the Constitution.
Yeah, they were at crisis.
For
They were
him
about
to
to break apart.
For him to deliver that then, that's what made it so impactful. And it wasn't like everything got better immediately. It's a process, right? But what he started is actually something we still experience today. We still have prayer in Congress every day. Every time they're in Congress now, that was something that he initiated.
Yeah.
So it's powerful.
The First Continental Congress opened. They had prayer. They began it with Jacob Duché.
Yep.
Well, we're letting the cat out of the bag here.
Yeah.
But
it's okay with me as long as people come and see the movie.
So Franklin at the convention stands up and he says, "How is it, sirs, that we have forgotten the supreme being that brought us through the revolution with so many interventions of his power, and we used to meet every day in here and open with prayer, and we haven't done it, and we haven't petitioned the Father of Lights."
Oh, you got it.
And he called the Constitutional Convention to prayer,
Yeah.
and they started praying every day, and that's all I'll say.
That's all. Some of that, and that latter part we don't know to be true, but we do know that it was a powerful, changing point and deciding point in that convention, and it's great. This is so interesting. But behind the scenes, the day that we filmed Franklin's big speech was actually Election Day.
Wow.
And we could have never timed all this. But if the cameras could have spun around and shown us, the crew and the director, we all had our little red, white, and blue I voted stickers on.
Oh, wow.
In fact, some of the delegates were in costume and went and voted, in costume. So what are the chances?
That's awesome.
It was a very special day. We call it a oneer. Our actor, John Sneed, who plays Ben Franklin, does a phenomenal job, and he delivered that speech flawlessly 7 times. Okay. The whole thing word for word.
Yeah.
So, the film A Great Awakening comes out April 3rd nationwide, and we are really, really excited about already the momentum and the impact it's having on people.
Yeah, and I'm excited to see it, but can you comment on something else, Joshua?
Sure.
Which is the First Great Awakening started 1730s, 1740 or whatever. What impact did that have on the ultimate, not the ultimate, but the country? A lot of historians say that it is what resulted in the American Revolution, the Declaration of Independence, the ideas that came out of the Great Awakening. Christ brought a revolution, right? He brought a spiritual revolution with truth. And that awakening in America produced a revolution of ideas as well. Can you comment on that?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, a revolution is a complete cultural shift. And we all know that takes a lot of time. And so the 30 years, which is a biblical definition of a generation, 30 years, the 30 years that led up to the revolution, the colonists were inundated with the preaching of Jonathan Edwards and George Whitefield and the Wesley brothers. And so a 30-year-old, by the time the Revolutionary War started, was from infancy all the way up through in this atmosphere of Christ-centeredness. And they became a self-governing and moral people. So much so that one of the delegates at the Constitution said, our moral code alone is enough. We don't need laws. That's how they weren't perfect, but they were strong. When you have an entire country of people, 80% of them, believing that, and they start saying, you know what, we dealt with a tyrant within ourselves, now it's time to deal with a tyrant across the sea. So for us, this film, it's not a movie, it's a movement, and it's the revelation that took place before the revolution, and I actually think that's happening again today.
Do you really?
Oh, yeah.
So we are now at the 250th anniversary of the Declaration, coming up this July 4th, and the prophetic words have come forward that the third Great Awakening has already begun.
I've heard that.
What's your perspective on this?
Yeah, well, we'll know it when we see fathers and sons uniting. You know what I mean? When we start seeing leaders of their household leading their family in prayer, when there's a cultural belief system shift, that's when we'll start to know that it's actually, an awakening is happening. When it gets into the homes, there's a famous quote, it's in the film, where Ben Franklin, he says, "The whole world's gone religious. I can't pass by a house without hearing the father of the household leading his family in worship and Bible teaching."
Yeah.
That's the signature of an awakening, when it gets into the homes and the fathers are leading their homes once again, and they're returning it back to Bible, to Scripture.
Amen. So, Joshua, thank you for coming on Truth
Oh,
and Liberty
man,
today.
this is great.
Your film's coming out in April.
Yep.
Where do people watch it?
Yeah, they can go to, it's going to be in movie theaters nationwide.
Okay.
Roadside Attractions is our distributor. They're the ones that did I Can Only Imagine, the first one way back. And so April 3rd, we're saying spread the word.
Okay.
And if they want to check out more information, they can go to sight-sound.com or agreatawakening.com.
Okay.
agreatawakening.com.
How exciting. Thank you for coming on Truth and
Bless
Liberty,
you.
brother.
Thank you,
All right.
sir.